That same day 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened here in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what's more, it's the 3rd day since this all took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further, but they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it's nearly evening, the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the 2 told what had happened on the way and how they recognized Jesus when he broke the bread.
I don't know whether you do this, but I have this habit that when I'm driving and if I'm on a motorway and I miss my turn off and I know that all I can do is carry on to the next junction and then turn around and come back again, that once that happens, my instincts seem to take over, and unconsciously I notice that I start to drive more slowly. It's as though my inner self has realised that I've gone past the place I want to be, that I'm now carrying on in a direction that's just taking me further and further away from where I should be. And something inside me, therefore, is trying to stop me from going any further. And my brain kind of has to take over, and I have to remind myself that if I don't keep going at the same speed, if I don't just get to where I need to go and turn around and come back again, I'm just going to make myself later and later. But it's kind of interesting the way my instincts seem to kick in and stop me from going off in directions that I know deep down I don't want to be travelling in. Now, why on earth would I share that observation on a day like today when we're looking at the story of these 2 travellers who make their way with Jesus from Jerusalem to Emmaus? Well, I want to suggest to you that one way in which we could describe their journey is basically as a wasted journey. A journey a little bit like mine when I miss my turn off and I just end up having to drive somewhere that I don't really want to go and then turn around and come back again, because that's of course what they did. They made their way from Jerusalem to Emmaus, and then a few minutes later they're turning around and they're making their way back. And the people that know about these things tell us that it's a journey of probably something between 10 and 12 miles, which they would have made on foot. That's quite a long way to walk if you know that all you're going to do is then turn around and retrace your steps back to the place that you've come from. But that's what happened. Now, I want us to spend some time thinking about that for a minute. And it's maybe not the way that traditionally you might have engaged with the story of the road to Emmaus. But the reason I want us to look at it that way is because I think in doing that, it has something particular to say to us about the situation that we're in at the moment. As I've already said, my instincts when I go off in a direction that I know I really don't want to be going in is to do everything I can to stop and to turn around and to come back. So just imagine that Jesus had entered into this story and done it in the way that my instincts would have told me to do it. What you would have had is a Jesus who comes running up to these two travellers as quickly as he can, shouting at them to stop. When he eventually catches up with them, he sort of says, no, whoa, turn around, go back, stop wasting your time. You really don't want to carry on walking to Emmaus, because trust me, you're going to want to end up back in Jerusalem soon. You're going to want to be back with the people you're just leaving. So don't waste your time going all that way. Just turn around, go back and get back to Jerusalem. And that's where you don't want to be. Well, yeah, that may have saved them a lot of trouble. It may have saved him a lot of trouble. It may have saved them a lot of energy and a lot of walking. But how much of an opportunity would have then been denied them to understand some of the deep truths and realities of their faith? And do you remember what they said to each other when they're left at the supper table and Jesus has gone away from them? And they kind of look at each other and they go, didn't our hearts burn within us when he was with us? Now, we can't exactly be sure what they were experiencing, what they meant by their hearts burning within us. But what that says to me, what screams out at me from that statement, is that a 12-mile long journey with Jesus on foot is not a wasted journey. No journey with Jesus is a wasted journey. Even if we end up turning around and going back to the place we started from, no journey with Jesus is a wasted journey. This was a journey in which they learned, in which they understood, in which they were inspired. And I'm sure there's a whole load of other words that I could try and come up with that they summarise in this phrase, our hearts burned within us. But what it says to me again and again is that no journey with Jesus is a wasted journey. Now, I've heard many people lament over the years that these two disciples didn't write down what Jesus said to them that day. And I'm sure that had they made a transcript of that conversation, it would have been a great asset to the church. But I'm also reasonably sure that an awful lot of what they said would have found its way into the narratives that the new early believers used to share with one another, and eventually into the New Testament epistles and other places like that. But perhaps the reason that they didn't write it down was because what really mattered to them wasn't so much what Jesus said, but the fact that he said it. The fact that he took the time to journey with them and to inspire them with his presence. And maybe there's something for us to learn in that. A lot of people, and a lot of people of faith, are beginning to recognise that there's a real resonance at the moment between this period of lockdown that we're in and the period of waiting that the New Testament records as taking place between Easter and Pentecost, which for the uninitiated is the part of the liturgical year that we're in at the moment. And yes, I know for many people, and we must never forget that for many people, this is a time of bereavement, of sorrow, of fear, of worry, of illness. But it's also a time when we can spend time reflecting and thinking. And if you've been engaging with these sermons and these services, you'll know that something that's really on my heart at the moment is that we use this time to stay with the story. We just let the reality of Jesus' death and resurrection dawn on us again. We let it re-impress itself into our being, which is why, yes, 2 weeks on from when we usually celebrate Resurrection Morning, I make no excuse for sticking with these narratives and looking at events that take place just a few hours and days after the disciples first discover the empty tomb. So you could say that we're all on our own Emmaus journeys at the moment. And I can understand, therefore, why we might really value a transcript of what Jesus said that evening. But let me ask you a question. Are you interested in knowing what Jesus said? Or would you rather experience what Jesus' followers experienced? What they describe as their hearts burning within us? Because I want to suggest to you that actually our faith offers us both. There's an awful lot that we can learn from the biblical narratives, and there's even more that we can learn when we look at their history, when we reflect on them and interact with them from the different angles of identity and history and textual analysis and all those other things that we can do. And trust me, it really is interesting, and it really can inspire and equip you to live as a Jesus follower. But it is only half of what our faith offers us, because we believe in a risen Jesus. A Jesus who says, I will never leave you or forsake you. A Jesus who in the upper room talked about going away so that he could come back again in the form of the Holy Spirit and indwell and inspire people. Yes, the Jesus who wants to be with us so that, in the words of the Emmaus travellers, our hearts can burn within us. So we're in lockdown. And we have time and space to make journeys in our minds and in our imaginations, even if we're not allowed to make journeys very far from our own homes. And there are different ways that we might think about those journeys. We could take a very pragmatic approach, like I talked about at the beginning, and say, well, let's just make sure we don't waste any time. Let's make sure we don't go off in any directions that we don't need to go. Let's make sure that we don't take any steps that we might find ourselves retracing. Or we could take what I might call a cerebral approach. What can I learn from this? How can I analyse and scrutinise and theorise about what's going on at the moment? Or we could take a devotional approach. If there's a new road to travel, if there's a road that I'm unfamiliar with, a road that I maybe didn't want to travel, a road that maybe I was never expecting to travel, but if this road needs to be travelled, then I want to travel it with Jesus. I want to know that same sense of my heart burning within me as I take my steps along its way. And I want to know that Jesus is risen, not just as a matter of proving the truth of the resurrection narratives or being able to demonstrate how the ancient writings of the Old Testament foretold it all, but in the words of a very old song that I learned to sing in Sunday school. You ask me how I know he lives within my heart. So if you want to accept my invitation to stay with the story, make it a chance to connect afresh with the living Jesus. And maybe the story of this journey to Emmaus might help us and give us some direction in how that might happen. So how did these travellers get from Jerusalem to Emmaus? And by that I don't mean how did they complete the physical journey, but how did they make the spiritual journey? The journey from despair to hope. The journey from confusion to recognition. From defeat to victory. From despondency to inspiration. The journey from broken hearts to hearts that were burning within them. Well, it begins with a very simple willingness to travel. Jesus made himself available to walk with them, and they accepted the offer of a stranger. So let's stay with that simple truth for a moment. Jesus is willing to join us on our journey. And maybe some of the strangers, maybe some of the strange circumstances that we find coming our way could be the way in which Jesus makes that journey with us. And at one level, it's so simple. A couple of travellers just made themselves available to share their journey. Have you ever been on one of those train journeys when you're in one of those carriages where there's a table, and so you find yourself sitting opposite another person who's facing you at that table, and you know that you're going to be stuck together maybe for a couple of hours? And if you're anything like me, all your instincts at that moment are to try and keep yourself to yourself. You maybe exchange the odd awkward glance and kind of look their way and smile every now and again. But even though they're only feet away from you, even though you're going to be together for maybe hours, they only ever remain an awkward stranger. But then something happens. Maybe something as simple as a jolt on the train, or somebody spills a cup of tea, or something else that just results in somebody making a passing remark. And then the conversation starts. And before you know it, you're exchanging stories. You're finding out why each of you is making this journey. You're learning all kinds of different things about each other's day. And suddenly it's a whole different atmosphere. And I just wonder whether, in the same way, it's one thing to say that Jesus is with us on the journey, but are we going to treat him as an awkward stranger? Or will something allow a conversation to really open up? It might be as simple as just determining to set some time aside each day to read the scriptures and to pray. Or maybe just laying to rest some of your hurts and struggles, and being determined to bring God back into your life conversation. And I don't know, perhaps your routines are the places where previously you've met with God, and those routines have been taken from you, and maybe you're struggling a little bit to connect with God now that they're gone. But God is with us in the journey, and it's up to us whether we keep him as an awkward stranger, the stranger in the opposite seat, or whether he becomes a conversation partner for the rest of the trip. And yes, to me, the story of the journey to Emmaus is a story that's that simple. So where did their conversation with Jesus start? Well, it started with the reality of their situation. They might not have realised it, but in that moment when they acted out what we would call today the Great Commission, which is to tell people about our experience of Jesus. And that's the second thing I want us to draw from this narrative of Emmaus. They just engaged. And their experience of Jesus at the time turned out to be quite disappointing and confusing. We thought he was going to sort things out for us. We thought he'd be the one to overcome the people that ended up putting him to death and crucifying him. We're confused by what people are now saying about him. Now, we might want to walk all over their story with the benefit of 2,000 years of hindsight. But Jesus did not ask them for a hermeneutically correct theological explanation of the events of Calvary. He just asked them what was on their mind. He just asked them what they were talking about. So if you don't even know what a hermeneutically correct theological explanation is, well, don't worry, because God isn't bothered in hearing one. The question that Jesus asks, the question that Jesus gives them permission to answer, is what's bugging you? What's disappointing you? What's confusing you? Jesus is not asking us to engage in a difficult conversation. And this might be a moment to look again at the words of Psalm 116, which are one of the other readings that are in today's lectionary. If we kind of draw out some of the comments that the psalmist makes and sort of put them into a more modern vernacular, then the sort of things he's saying is, I love the fact that God listens to me. When I was up to my neck in it, all I had to do was shout help. When I said this is awful, it became a prayer. And even when I said things in a panic, God listened, and God was undeservedly good to me. The psalmist knew what it was to have a very ordinary conversation with God and to just tell God how it was. And I love the way that Jesus just comes into their day. No big introduction, no grand announcement. Just, what's on your minds? What are you talking about? Just tell me how it is, and you might be surprised and even excited by what comes out of that conversation. Your hearts might yet burn within you because of what we've had to say. And so they arrive in Emmaus, and they're faced with a choice. Do we just say, well, thank you very much, you've explained everything we need to know, we're deeply grateful for that, so cheerio, off you go well? No, they invite him in. And I wonder whether this is one of those moments that defines what it means to be a heart burned within us kind of person. If all they needed was information, if all they needed was a faith that would just put them straight in their thinking, then the stranger's job was done. He could go his way and remain forever a friendly stranger. A useful stranger, a knowledgeable stranger, but a stranger. But they didn't send him on his way. They invite him in. They invite him into their home, into their personal space, the space in which they would have been confined to if Emmaus had been in a COVID-19 lockdown at the time. They invited him to sit at their table, to share in their evening meal. And it's there, in the isolation of their home, that they discover who he fully is. And there's a lot to be gleaned from this story about just letting people in. Not only letting Jesus in, but letting others into their story. Do you remember where I began talking about this as a wasted journey? Well, if they really had wanted to avoid the trip all the way from Jerusalem to Emmaus, all they needed to do was listen to the women, to trust the word of others, to go against the grain of society and not be prejudiced against their testimony. But they didn't. And so Jesus took bread and broke it. And in that act, they discovered who he was. And this is a moment at one level of great familiarity, echoing with the events of the Last Supper. But it's also a moment when a whole new horizon dawns. And today, when we break bread and share wine, we do so to remember the events that these Emmaus travellers were part of. And we do it in community. In our tradition, we call it a communion table, which is the place of the women and the other members of the community. It's the place where their stories get shared. And Jesus both shared the story with them directly, but he also helped them to recognise that the women's story was their story. Our story is each other's story. God has called us into community. And even if they didn't realise it at the time, their instincts told them that that was true, which is why they went running as fast as their legs could carry them back to Jerusalem, renewed and re-energised by their encounter with Jesus and the truth of his identity, to join their story with the story of their fellow believers so that it all became one great big communal chorus of Jesus is alive. And the time will come, it really will come, when we too can gather back together, when we too will have the chance to share our Emmaus journey stories. It might be in a few weeks, it might be longer, but that time will come. And when it comes, what will your story be? How will you determine now to make sure that Jesus has been travelling with you on your Emmaus journey? Do you know, I hope that this ancient narrative of some centuries ago might just help us in making sure this really is an Emmaus journey. Be open to those who might share it with you. Let Jesus be present as part of that journey. Be honest with God and don't feel that you need to be anything else. Listen to the story of others and open every aspect of your experience to the presence of Jesus. As you sit at table, as you pray, as you spring clean, and whatever you do, look for those resonances that tell you that even if this is a strange place to be, Jesus is alive. Because Jesus will be with you in the midst of this story, in the midst of your story. And that is how you will know that he is risen. He's risen indeed.